Hey everybody, it's Bear. It is Thursday, January 13th, 2022, and today I wanted to tackle another uncomfortable subject. Last week I talked about urinalysis tests, which are not comfortable for pretty much anybody, but especially for trans people because we have parts that the person that's observing you may not be, prepared to see. We have dysphoria around those parts, and so forth. Today, I want to talk to you about being a trans man and going to the gynecologist. Specifically because I actually visited the gynecologist today and I want to talk about it while it's still fresh. Um, this is something that I don't think a lot of people realize about trans people. I want to do another video another time about the expectation that we've had, like this whole transition, a total transition, and we've had like all of our internal parts removed and our genitals operated on and stuff like that. That's not always a thing. Uh, so many trans men that can't afford it or whatever, we still have our internal reproductive parts. Um, for me, my transition has been testosterone and top surgery, and I haven't had any other kind of surgeries. So I'm biologically female, I identify as male, and that means that I have biological functions that need to be tended to medically, and that includes going to the gynecologist and getting regular exams, pap smears, and dealing with contraceptives. So for me personally, I am a transgender male. I also identify as gay, and I have primarily in the past had sexual relations with cisgender gay men. I've had some experience with trans men, but it's just played out that it's been cis men, and that means that I have to be worried about pregnancy and contraceptives. I'm not the kind of person that has time for children in my life, and so even before I identified as male, I was always really careful about pregnancy and contraceptives. While I believe it is your right to have an abortion, it's something I don't want to be faced with the decision of making. I cannot possibly conceive of carrying a child, but I also would have a really hard time actually getting an abortion. So I've been really careful about preventative care. So that includes getting an IUD put in just over 6 years ago. I chose the 3-year IUD. It's called the Skyla. It has less of a hormone output, and that's because I'm already messing with my body's hormones by, replacing estrogen with testosterone, and then going ahead and putting in more estrogen, even though it's just in that area. I didn't want to kind of like throw off that balance and stuff. So that's why I went with the Skyla, which means that I have to have it replaced every 3 years. Um, as someone who is over 30 years old, I'm supposed to have a pap smear every 3 to 5 years. So I just go ahead and get them both done at the same time, and that was today. So, some things that I want to talk about, aside from our healthcare system and the fact that it's based on the binary and there's no intake for people who aren't biologically male, biologically female. We're not going to get into that today. Let's talk about just being a trans man and having to go in and having to get this stuff done. It's got to get done. It's your health and it's your body, and you need to take care of it. These parts, they have to be checked. They have to be checked for irregular cells, HPV, cervical cancer, and other medical factors. It's just something that has to be done, and it can be uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong, but it's a matter of kind of figuring out your way of getting through it. So my way of getting through it is by picking up the phone. I've talked about this before. Just pick up that phone and talk to the office, ask your questions over the phone. So you're kind of removed. You're making a healthcare appointment anyway. You have to like make that appointment either by the phone or something else, right? A lot of these websites now have another option because our society is way more comfortable with texting and emailing. So some of them have email functions, contact us this way, and you can just go ahead and have that level of separation where you're not talking to another person. Um, even over the phone. Some of them even have live chat functions, and that's really, really cool. For me, I don't mind making that phone call, but I have kind of my questions that I ask, and the biggest one is your office transgender affirmative? So whether you're calling or you're doing it via email or text, ask that. That's a huge key word, and how that person responds is going to tell you a lot. So personally, in my past, when I first started my transition, I went in for what was then, or I wanted to make an appointment for what was then a yearly exam, and it's not yearly anymore, like I said, which is really cool. Um, but I called the doctor's office that I had already been going to for years, and I wanted to see that same doctor. And I asked exactly that, and the person said, "What?" And that tells you a lot right there. If you ask, "Is your office transgender affirmative?" and the answer is, "I don't know what you're talking about," the answer is no, or at least that person doesn't know, which means that person hasn't had that training, which means that office hasn't offered sensitivity training or had that like conversation. So that's right there. It tells you a lot. I continued the conversation by saying, "Well, what I'd like to know is, does your office treat transgender men? What that means is I identify as male, but I have a uterus, ovaries, and a cervix." And she got a real bad attitude really, really quickly. And she said, "Well, our office, it's a women's healthcare office. We don't treat men." And I said, "Okay, again, I'm a man who has ovaries, a uterus, and a cervix. Are you telling me that I cannot be seen at your office?" And she said, "We don't treat any kind of men." At which point I asked to speak to a supervisor. You have the option, if this is a new um, office that you're dealing with, right there you can choose to check that place off the list. I don't want to go here, move down your list and make the next phone call. I chose to continue that conversation because it was a doctor I was familiar with and I wanted to see her again. So I spoke to a supervisor and I got a major apology, right? The supervisor knew what I was talking about. They knew what that meant. They reached out to the doctor, and the doctor actually called me back and said, "I'm really proud of you for moving forward with, your transition, and I support you. If you want to come in and see me, that's fine. I will see you, but I don't have what I feel is adequate training to know how testosterone is affecting your care, and I think you'd be better seeing somebody that has that training," which is what I did, right? I moved down the list and I found a place that was trans affirmative. I started going there. Next step. Next step is actually walking into the office, and this is a really, really hard one for a lot of people. The reason being, again, you're going into a place that is labeled women's healthcare, and the patients are primarily cisgender women, and the office is geared for that, just right down to the media on the walls, the pamphlets, the magazines that they put out. Everything in that office is geared towards cisgender women, and that can be really difficult when you are going through a transition, especially super early on. You are constantly, as a transgender person, side note, constantly being kind of slapped in the face with societal expectations for what you were expected to become when you were assigned your birth gender and based on your birth sex. It's just something that, again, allies just really don't even realize, because you're so attuned to it. So, this is a big one. You go into the waiting room, you have to go in and check in with someone who should be aware of the fact that they have a trans person coming in. They have your name on the list if your name's been changed, and you're lucky enough to have been able to afford your legal name change and ID change. Another thing that people don't realize costs a lot of money, um, and is not accessible to everybody. So it's difficult, and if you have any kind of social anxiety or what have you, that plays a big factor too. So have patience with yourself. If you're feeling like that feeling of panic and dysphoria and anxiety and everything is piling up on you and you really don't want to go and you're really scared, that's normal. And you need to just have that patience with yourself. Do whatever it is you need to do. Everybody has a different method. Check in with yourself, do your breathing exercises, whatever it is for you. For me, um, it's just a matter of kind of, I'm an extrovert. And when I'm uncomfortable with something, I run straight at it. I that's really how I deal with a lot of things. So I go in and I just kind of like straight to the receptionist, sit down, occupy myself with whatever, my phone, a magazine, something like that, and I just kind of like just ignore the fact that inevitably people are wondering why there's a guy waiting to see a gynecologist. Other people will bring somebody with them. That's a really good trick. Since they're expecting to see a woman, um, a lot of people will bring a female friend with them, and just kind of like play act that they're there as a couple getting their regular like pregnancy checkup, or that you're just there with her to be supportive. That's a huge one. If you've got that option, go for it. I have had a tendency of just kind of having to be independent, so I'm used to just going alone. So do whatever it is that helps you. If it's phone call, email, if it's doing some kind of technique, if it's kind of hiding, you know, wearing baggier clothes that kind of covers you up, whatever it is that works for you, do that thing. Next, though, is dealing with insurance. I already talked about dealing with staff. Have that conversation, be ready to kind of advocate for yourself or step away. Dealing with insurance is a really big one that people don't realize. If you have had your legal gender marker and name updated, um, your insurance may have an issue with covering, again, what is typically healthcare for women. And they're going to wonder why, or just straight up deny coverage for a man having that procedure. It's another thing that we need to kind of just fix that system, you know. And a lot of people get turned down. So be ready for that. Call your insurance. When you choose your insurance plan, call them up and talk to a provider. Ask, like, am I going to be good having this coverage for these procedures and so forth? If you're super early in your transition and you're interested in having surgery, make that phone call before you choose your insurance plan. And also be ready to advocate for yourself once again. It's another thing that we just like have to deal with. We have to deal with kind of fighting the system so much. It's exhausting, and it's something that our friends just don't realize we're even dealing with. Um, so be ready to file a rebuttal in the instance that your insurance denies coverage for your procedure. Especially, I mean, office visits and um, medicines and stuff like that are already expensive. But if you're going in for your like hysterectomy or any kind of like those kinds of surgeries, be ready. Go in with knowledge, ask those questions, be ready to file a rebuttal, be ready to lawyer up if you have to. Last thing, I want to just readdress the fact that this is stuff that has to get done. It is your health, it is important. You want to monitor what's going on in that area as far as abnormal cells, which could lead to like HPV. If you're of a certain age and you're not monogamous, you want to talk about that HPV vaccine, and be ready for things that may come up, like cervical cancer and abnormal cells and stuff like that. These are things that we have to monitor. It's just like your regular healthcare, and making sure that everything in your body is functioning well and normally, especially as you get older. I'm 41 years old. There's things that don't function as well as they used to. My eyesight has changed. My thyroid kind of got out of whack, and I have medication for that. And that's not something that I would have caught without just going in and talking to a doctor and being like, these things are happening and I'm not really sure why. And he was like, oh, that could be your thyroid. Let's get that checked out. I had no idea, right? Same thing with your reproductive parts. You have really no way of knowing when something is going wrong until something's really, really wrong. If you're already showing symptoms, something is really like happening. So that's why we have regular health care and regular checkups. Like I said before, it used to be yearly that you had to go in for a PAP and an exam, and it's not that way anymore. They now recommend like every 3 to 5 years, depending on your age, check that. But that's what I was told today. They were like, you don't need to come back for like 5 years unless we find abnormal cells. Happens to be that I have a 3-year IUD, so I'll be back there in 3 years anyway. As far as the physical discomfort and dysphoria, though, not to put this last, it's It's big. Again, give yourself that space. You are not wrong. Your feelings are valid. This is not a comfortable thing. It is another reminder that you are transgender and all the things that come with that. And it's also just not really comfortable. Not the worst thing in the world, but it's not comfortable. So give yourself that space, do your breathing techniques, and talk to the doctor. Don't be afraid to speak up and say, yeah, I'm feeling really anxious about this. Today when I went in, the doctor came in and she said, hey, I've got a student. Is it okay if my student comes in and observes this? And I was like, you know what? No, I'm feeling kind of anxious about this today, and I don't want to add that to my level of anxiety. And there was no questions asked. It was just like, cool, we're not going to do that. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and bring those things up and breathe through it. It's not forever. It's a couple of, maybe an hour out of your day every like couple of years. You're gonna get through it, and stay strong. And please, please take care of yourself. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.